Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate you being with me, and we're going to summarize today what we have seen thus far, and this is the concluding video in our study of Daniel 9:24 through 27, and the pivotal prophecy of the 70 weeks. The reason for this study is because several people had asked me, how do you explain, if you take the view that the 70 weeks ended in AD 70, then how do you explain the gap? Because that 70 weeks seems to be a chronological calculation. It seems to be sequential. And my explanation for that is, as simply as I could state it, that the Jewish feast days underlie and serve, they are essentially paradigmatic for understanding Daniel chapter 9. I've shared with you, by way of summary here, that Daniel chapter 9 contains no less than 4 separate, distinct allusions, echoes, references to the Jewish festal calendar. Now look, when we see these festal references, when we see these connections between what is stated in the text and the Jewish calendar, then upon what hermeneutical basis would we ignore the calendar? And it's outplaying, it's playing out, it's unfolding in fulfillment. 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. Folks, that is festal reference. 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. That is a festal reference. So everywhere we look, honestly, in Daniel chapter 9, we find these Jewish feast days references. Now, one popular view of Daniel chapter 9 and the 70 weeks is that the 70 weeks ended in 34-35 AD. Obviously, I reject that view. And there are a number of reasons why. 70 weeks were determined to finish the transgression. Well, to finish the transgression, as multitudes of commentators have noted, means to fill up the measure of sin. Well, guess what? The measure of sin was not filled up in 34-35 AD. Pardon me. Paul, writing in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 14-16, said that by killing the apostles and prophets of Jesus, the Jews were, at that time, filling up the measure of their sin. Furthermore, in 1 Peter, in the book of Revelation, Old Covenant Israel was busy filling up the measure of their sin. Well, if 70 weeks were determined to fill up the measure of sin, and if the measure of sin has not been filled up by 34 or 35 AD, then the 70 weeks did not end in 34 or 35 AD. 70 weeks were determined to put away sin. Well, Paul said that Israel's sin would be put away at the parousia of Romans chapter 11. Now, did Jesus come to offer his life as a sacrifice, who shed his blood as a sacrifice to put away sin? Well, Hebrews 9:26 is emphatic on that. He most assuredly did. No one denies that. But that was part of the transitional process, part of the process of the atonement. 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. It is a humongous error to believe and to claim that the atonement was finished at the cross. That violates everything about Hebrews chapter 9, where basing his comments on the high priest actions on the Day of Atonement, he talks about the high priest killing the sacrifice, entering into the most holy place, coming back out, and he says Jesus was to appear the second time for salvation. Now, he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, but Paul, in contemplating that putting away of sin, puts that finalization, if you please, the consummation, just like he does in the consummation of the atonement at the parousia. Romans 11, 25 to 27. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sin. When would that be? The Redeemer shall come out of Zion. So here we have these elements to put away sin, to make the atonement, that are an integral, vital element of the Jewish feast days. But they could not and were not fulfilled by 34-35 AD. Now, since the putting away of sin and since the making of the atonement, absolutely inseparably linked to the 70 weeks, not afterwards, but tied to and confined within the 70 weeks, then unless you're willing to say that the coming of the Lord to take away sin, unless the coming of the Lord to bring salvation occurred in 34-35 AD, then the 70 weeks did not end in 34-35 AD. Well, 70 weeks were determined to seal vision and prophecy. That means to fulfill all vision and all prophecy. When did Jesus say all things written would be fulfilled? Luke 21-22. In describing the fall of Jerusalem that occurred in AD 70, these be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written must be fulfilled. So watch. Daniel chapter 9, 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy. That prophecy concludes with the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Jesus, in describing the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, said, this is when all prophecy is fulfilled. You can't have vision and prophecy sealed up, fulfilled, outside of the 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy. And finally, 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. Now, everlasting righteousness is the new creation, as we've seen over the last two videos. In the Jewish festal calendar, you have Rosh Hashanah, which is judgment. Well, folks, that's the judgment of Jerusalem of Daniel 9, 26 and 27. Rosh Hashanah is the last of the final three, or first of the final three feast days. It did not occur in AD 34-35. So you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur. Now watch this. People try to say Yom Kippur atonement was completed at the cross. Then that rips Yom Kippur completely out of its chronological sequence. Totally destroys the chronology of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Totally destroys it. Oh, and it places Yom Kippur back here at Passover. You can't do that, folks. It destroys the chronology. So you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur, and you have Sukkot. Sukkot, all of those were the time when the books were opened and the world was judged. And then you have Shemini Atzeret. According to Leviticus chapter 23, on the day after the seventh day of Sukkot was another separate, totally distinct feast day. Celebration. According to the authorities, according to the scholars, according to the rabbis, this Shemini Atzeret celebrated the new creation. So when would the new creation come? Okay, if the bringing in of everlasting righteousness is the new creation, then if the bringing in of everlasting righteousness belongs within the 70 weeks and not outside the 70 weeks, then when was everlasting righteousness? When did the new creation arrive? Now, folks, listen, it began with the resurrection of Jesus. I fully believe that. Paul could write to the Corinthians and say, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. Well, they were a new creature, but they were waiting on the new creation. See, it's a process. Just like Paul would say in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 6, I am confident that the one who has begun a good work in you will complete it at the day of the Lord. So the new creation had begun. It was not fully arrived. It was not consummated. That means the feast days, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, were not completed. Now what does that mean? It means that until the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, the Jewish feast days were not fulfilled. If the Jewish feast days were not fulfilled, Daniel 9 is not fulfilled. If Daniel 9 is not fulfilled, then Israel and Israel's calendar remains fully in effect. But if Israel's calendar remains fully in effect, then Israel remains God's covenant people. Torah remains valid. You cannot have the 70 weeks of Daniel fulfilled in 34-35 AD without demanding that the judgment, the atonement, the resurrection, and Shemini Atzeret arrived at that time. If you deny that judgment has occurred, if you deny that Christ has occurred, if you deny that the new creation has occurred, then you are imposing Torah today. And what that means is, from the fulfillment of the first 4 feast days, all the way up to Pentecost, there was that period of time of the waiting for the judgment of Rosh Hashanah that the New Testament says was coming in a very little while. And it was in the fulfillment of those last 3 feast days in the Jewish war of 66 to 70 AD, with the sweeping away of the Old Covenant world, that we find the full establishment of the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem, wherein dwells everlasting righteousness, and into which all nations, anyone, any man of any nation who accept Jesus as Messiah can find life and righteousness in that new creation. Okay, don't forget, I have a very special offer for this month only. These 2 books, if you bought them separately and paid shipping, they would cost you $35.95. For the month of January only, and there's a banner on my website so that all you have to do is just click it, march right through it. Total delivered price, $25. Please take advantage of that. You'll be glad that you did. I explain in these books in even more detail why the 70 weeks of Daniel could not have been fulfilled in 34-35 AD. Okay, tomorrow we will continue our refutation of Brock Hollett's book, The Debunking of Preterism. You don't want to miss it. And then next Monday, Lord willing, we will begin an extensive study of the Olivet Discourse as requested by you. So, I'll see you tomorrow.